This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. In particular, this month is being sponsored by Lindsay Marie Trebet, UFO Weekly News, Eric Hervin, and Nick Martin. I thank you all so very much. And if you want to become a patron, you can do so at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight, I have a listener who has a number of weird stories that have occurred to him in his life, and we will be getting to that momentarily. I am putting this together on the evening of September 20th, which, of course, as everyone knows, was the Storm Area 51 day. And what it looks like, for the most part, for anyone who hasn't paid attention, is it looks like nothing happened at all. To quote from CBS News, the Storm Area 51 invitation spawned festivals in the tiny Nevada towns of Rachel and Hiko near the military site and a more than 2-hour drive from Las Vegas. Lincoln County Sheriff Kerry Lee estimated late Thursday about 1,500 people had gathered at the festival sites and said more than 150 people also made the rugged trip several additional miles on bone-rattling dirt roads to get within selfie distance of the gates. Authorities say one person was arrested on a charge of public urination, and another was detained early Friday at a gate to Area 51. Lee scheduled a media briefing later Friday. The sheriff said it's public land. They're allowed to go to the gate as long as they don't cross the boundary. Those that know what to expect camping in the desert are going to have a good time, said Jorg Arnu, a Rachel resident who can see the festival grounds from his home. Those who show up in shorts and flip-flops will find no protection against critters, snakes, and scorpions. They will get cold at night, and they're not going to find what they're looking for, and they're going to get angry, Arnu said. So basically, this turned into a weekend-long festival. No one really stormed the gates wisely, because they probably would have been, at very least, restrained. Yeah, so it kind of turned into a joke that clearly made some people a lot of money, not surprisingly. I would really suspect this is going to be a yearly thing from now on, the Storm Area 51 festivals in these surrounding towns. I guess none of us quite saw that coming, but we should have at this point. It's just kind of where a lot of this stuff ends up. All right. As I said, tonight's show is a listener who had a bunch of stories, and instead of reading them, we had him come on to talk about them. And if you have stories you want to share, or a story you want to share, contact me at stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com. We'll either talk about the story on the air, or we'll bring you on to talk about your story. Or if you just want opinions on the story, you don't want it on the air, that is also okay. I've had a number of people do that, send me stuff they just wanted my feedback on. You know, all of that's okay, but send it to stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com. It is the best place because I'm less likely to forget about it if it's there. I get enormous amounts of email, so, you know, if you're looking for an immediate response and I don't get back to you fairly quick, it's okay to message me again and kind of remind me, because I do get very overwhelmed. Beyond that, other general questions can be sent to contact@wheredidtheroadgo.com. And of course, if you want to become a patron and help us out, it is so greatly appreciated. You patrons are absolutely awesome. And we do extra segments on a lot of the shows and regular FAQ shows where the patrons come up with the questions and we either answer them or talk about the subjects they come up with. And some of those are really, really deep. Some of the questions my Patreons come up with are just, wow. Also, I want to remind you that Adam Sane has his Strange Realities Conference on October 19th down in Tennessee, Nashville. So if you want to meet Joshua Cutchin, Timothy Renner, etc., go check that out. Help him make that first conference a success so he continues doing them in the next few years. Also, on October 12th, I'm going to be at Albatwitch Day, which Timothy Renner is a big part of. So although I'm not doing anything official there, I will be there And if you're interested in coming out, there's a bunch of cool stuff going on. And I believe Timothy's doing some ghost tours at the end of the night. It's like 11 a.m. to like 5 p.m. and then there's stuff afterwards. It's free, as far as I know. The ghost tours aren't, but the actual day is just like when we were there 2 years ago, they closed off a street and there were bands and people doing presentations and vendors and stuff like that. And it was pretty neat. And this year is set to be much bigger. It should be a lot of fun. Come find me there. Say hi. All right. So this interview is with Randy, and Randy has a lot of different stuff that happened to him, and he jumps around a lot. On top of that, Skype is definitely an imperfect tool. Overall, the Skype sound quality is better than, say, a phone, but especially near the end of this interview, he starts dropping out a lot. We couldn't get around it. We redid a couple segments, but there's going to be times where the narrative sort of jumps a little bit. You'll have to fill in the pieces. I tried to fix it as much as possible. And as I said, Randy jumps around a lot too. So I hope everyone can follow this because he has some really interesting stuff that has happened to him in his life. Go to wheredidtheroadgo.com for everything, Patreon and, extra stuff and the entire archive of shows from the beginning. And lots of other stuff. There's really a lot of stuff there. And here's Randy. Tonight I'm speaking with Randy Dillon. And you first contacted me, Randy, when we were doing what ended up being what we call the robot circles incident. Because Cheryl Lee was hearing weird voices in her headset. And she was telling us what she was hearing. And one of them was your name, Randy. And you were kind of in a slightly altered state when this happened, right?
Yeah, I was actually. I was in my room and I was, at that sleeping state, just listening to the radio show. I usually listen to your show maybe a couple days after it comes on. And when I go to sleep, sometimes I ask myself if I'm dreaming over and over again repetitively. And I get into like this weird parallel state. And I heard my name being spoken, and then it was when I kind of had fallen asleep while I was like listening to your show, and then all of a sudden I'm hearing my name, and it like wakes me up, and it like wakes my wife up, and I'm like, "You're not gonna believe what just happened." I said, "I'm like we're having this like," and it was just a weird show, and I remember it kind of taking its course in my dreams and stuff like that as well, and it was like, this is really bizarre. And then what was even more bizarre, a few days later, I'm listening to another one of your shows and you're talking about it again. And I was like, you got to hear this. This is crazy. And so I kind of put I kind of jokingly put like a YouTube comment because every once in a while, I'll say, oh, that was a great show, whatever. I listen a lot and I put something down there and it's like Robot Circles, Randy from YouTube. Like, whoa, that was a trip, because you're like, this dude's like dreamscaping on the show. And the funny thing is I listened to the show after you recorded it. So for it to like have that kind of like, it was just really odd. I can't, it's an unexplained thing, unexplained event.
Yeah. Interesting coincidence.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell me, you sent me a long email of different experiences you've had since you were very young. You have a pretty good memory of when you were young.
Yeah. Well, in actuality, what I did was I sat down one day because things just kind of kept happening. And then, I've been married to the same lady now for about 5 years. We have 2 kids together, and she has some similar things that go on too. And we had some things that we started sharing experiences that happened later on. And I'm like, kind of like I was talking to the author Steph Young a little bit through email too, like a couple years ago. And she was like, well, you mind telling me some of your experiences? So I'd kind of started putting some of that to thought because I just kind of like followed her books, and of course, David Paulides and just different, I think the guy, Steve Stockton, I think his name is as well. Mm-hmm. Just, kind of following their stuff and going, wow, there's like some crazy, synchronicities going on with that stuff. So in writing that email, I put some stuff together and I went, wow. And then, when you're thinking about the experiences, I just kept writing some stuff down. I left some stuff out, and I kind of realized that when I was about 2 years old, some really weird, things started happening. And it started out for me, I was at my babysitter's house, and I was taking a nap in her back room. I kind of she was friends with my mom, so I kind of got carte blanche in the nice, big room in the back. But I guess she was making lunch or doing something, and she got a weird feeling, so she went to check on me. And I was basically laying there, and what she said was I looked like I was in a catatonic state, and I was vomiting, and vomit was coming out, through my mouth. But what I was experiencing is, at least my early memories, was something sitting on my chest. And so, they called the ambulance. I got taken to the hospital. They did a bunch of tests. And all I remember is just kind of, being pretty lethargic in a room, seeing my family. I was really young, so the memories are really, weird.
Yeah.
So to cut back later on, like when I was about, an adolescent, I'd asked my mom, well, hey, what happened? And they said, well, at first they thought maybe you ingested some drugs. They didn't know if maybe you had a seizure disorder. So they did a bunch of tests on you. They did, the CAT scan, things like that. And they said that I had what they described as more electricity going on in my brain than a normal brain. And they kind of wanted to study me. And this was in like the Napa Valley in California. And so I'm 43. So this would have been, maybe around 78.
Okay.
And of course my parents were like, nope. So come to find out, my dad's mom had a seizure disorder. So they said, must be that. So they, started me on some medication, made me kind of crazy, things like that. And, there's some different things, when you're a child, things happen that aren't necessarily good, and they kind of put you in a bad predicament. And so there was a little bit of trauma that was kind of, introduced to me as a kid that I had to deal with. And what it did was, all I remember was having, like, I'd go to bed at night and I'd have like night terrors, like the typical things where you wake up, you're scared. But the problem with what was happening with me was I was being like taken, and I was in somebody's arms. And my parents, what it looked like was that they were completely awake, and they were laughing, watching their TV show. Back then, probably smoking their cigarettes, drinking Diet Coke, whatever they were doing. And I'm like trying to speak, but I'm totally muffled. So as a little kid at 2, 3, 4 years old, I'm just thinking that I'm kind of having night terrors or nightmares. I remember trying to go to my parents and wake them up. They put me back in bed, that whole thing. But it just was really vivid. And growing up, I've never not been able to really think about those experiences and what they were. And I remember the road that we lived on, because when I was 2 years old, something else that happened was me and my mom and my brother were driving in a car. She hit the back end of a truck. We got in a really bad accident. My mom became disabled. My brother almost bit his tongue off. And I was like flying through the air. And I remember getting ready to go through the windshield. And my brother was in the front seat. He raised his arms, and I hit his arms so hard. It was the only thing that kept me from going through that windshield. But I was so young, and I was like, everything happened in such slow motion. It was such a crazy energy that, I remember going to the hospital, coming home. My mom was down. She lost like half of her ankle. And so I got kind of started getting raised by other people. I had, my aunts and stuff. I had to stay at different people's houses. So I just kind of got, I don't know, like as a kid, when you lose your mom for a little while and stuff, that's kind of a hard time to do that.
Yeah.
But all I remember is the nightmares. All I remember is lights outside my window. I remember my brother, who was 8 years older than me, seeing these lights outside the window. I remember going to sleep and feeling like I'm falling, and having really crazy dreams. So that kind of, I don't want to stick, too much there, but it kind of like just had weird experiences growing up.
Yeah.
But one of the weirdest things I remember was on that same street. We lived there. I was playing in the kitchen, and I don't know if you remember those old windows, but they'd go from like the floor to the ceiling.
Yeah.
And like really big, and they kind of had like that little metal ramming around them, and you could use a handle to kind of open them up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, something was kind of beckoning me to look through the window. So I'm like, I could only have been maybe 2, 3 years old. And I remember like it was probably dinner time. My mom was over the stove or whatever. My dad was at the table. And I look through this curtain, and I see this face staring right back at me, completely distorted, gross. I got a feeling in my stomach. It still like shell shocks me today. And it was the first time that I saw something manifest kind of like in regular time. And I mean, you can't even explain it. You can't explain the feeling. I was sick. I was hurt. I was scared. But what was weird is that nobody around me seemed to notice. And so I just kind of closed the curtain and went back to playing and doing what I was doing, because it was just really overwhelming, you know? And that kind of stuff kind of just kept on happening, you know? We moved out into the country and got out of the city, and this is still in the Napa Valley. And back, you know, in the late 70s, early 80s, everything was like dairy fields. It was before all the vineyards and the wine came in. And we got, you know, really lucky, and you know, we got a nice piece of property. And I had 28 acres where I had a dog, and we'd go and we'd hang out. So like kind of what was started happening out there was one really weird experience was my dad was down in like the basement area. He had like a shop down there, and he'd go down there and fiddle, you know, like a dad does at nighttime. Right. And there was like this big, like, you know, like a rock gravel driveway turnaround at the top of this hill where we lived at. And there were like about 2 hills and a lake over, a reservoir, a mountain, and behind our house was a big hill. And I was probably about 4 or 5 at this point, and I'm playing outside, and my dad, he isn't really, you know, having much to do with me. He was probably drinking a little bit, or, you know, just tinkering. And I was out, I had my bike, and I remember being on the gravel turnaround, and I saw a light kind of come down from the sky. And as it came down, it kind of like opened up, and it almost looked like a circle with something in the middle working on something. And I literally watched something land behind the hill. It made no noise. I basically just went, I didn't see that. That wasn't something I saw. So, you know, I go to my brother, who's like 8 years older than me. He's in his room, and he's listening to whatever he's listening to. And I'm like, you're not going to believe what I just saw. Well, you know, and he's like, whatever. Whatever. You didn't see it. Really, like something. Oh yeah, we have an airplane that came behind our house. Nobody heard it. Like, not even understanding like what I was explaining. I didn't even know what I was explaining.
Right.
And you know, summer times would come, and I was a pretty lonely kid. My brother was 8 years older than me, so his friends, you know, they did their thing, and I did mine. So when I was like 8, he was like 16. So he was doing, you know, teenage stuff, and I'd be out just kind of on the mountain with my dog. And I remember finding a water well. And what was really weird about this water well, it was like covered up, and it was like on the back part of the property. I remembered when I was about 2 or 3, having a nightmare about like this witch trying to push me in the same water area. And it looked exactly the same from the dream. And I remember like laying there, and my dog just like kind of walking off, and hours go by, and next thing I know, it's almost like dinner time at my house. I can't explain it. It's like me and my dog would go outside and play, and my mom would be like, "Oh, I can't even believe you didn't come home for lunch." And I'm like, "Well, how long have I been out here?"
Right.
You know, it's just, you know, and what's really bizarre is one night, my brother, we used to play like tag football or whatever, and I tried to, you know, get along with the big kids. They'd push me around, make fun of me, do those kind of things. And I got pretty, you know, upset with my brother. And I went and sat up on a hill where we used to slide down on cardboard. And back in the day, we used to listen to KFRC. And that was like the radio station. And it's just what I listened to. I was up there, had my dog with me, and I saw my brother walk from the house. And I could see him come up, you know, around that circular driveway where the gravel is, come over the fence, come up the hill. And he came up, and he was kind of come up there to like say he was sorry for being a jerk that day. Well, as we're sitting there, I was really, really upset, really mad. Mm-hmm. And we looked over across the hill, and there was a light that was coming up over the hill, and it looked like one headlight on a car. It had blinking lights on each side, and it kind of hovered over the hill, and it probably would have been about, I'd say, 3/4 of a mile on the other side of Brown's Field, we called it, across the way. And that thing literally just sat there and like had an energy. It didn't make a noise. It just kind of made everything silent. And I told my brother, I said, "Do you see that?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, that's what I'm talking about. Those are the things that are coming around here, you know. And just as we said that, in a lightning like strike, that thing disappeared. It left a flash in the sky. And of course, we run, you know, like crazy kids back down to the house, tried to tell my parents. They're totally aloof and whatever, and just think we're crazy. And, you know, I mean, we pretty much thought that we were, you know. And
Yeah.
what's really weird about that area is my sister has the property now that's down below that area at another house. And then, like, down the road, when I was about 17, my parents had moved down the street from there about 2 miles, and I had weird experiences at each one of those houses, and they happened a little bit later on in life, and I'll kind of go over that maybe a little bit later. You know, I just had, you know, a lot of stuff that happened, you know, was pretty traumatic when I was a kid, and I just think that, you know, those things kind of perpetuated my psyche. I don't know if you know, there's some stuff that has to do with that, you know, stuff in my brain, the extra lightning that's going on in my mind.
Right.
You know, you don't know, you know, and they never let, you know, me get studied to kind of figure that out. You know, I do know that in life, my mind is always really over processed. Like right now, I can kind of think about 70 different things at one time, you know, and they just get kind of confusing, and I go on tangents. And what's funny is when I was a little bit older, I started working at mental hospitals. I actually started as a housekeeper when I was about 18, and I worked my way up pretty much on and off for 18 years. I worked in mental health, and I was like, man, I'm about as crazy as these people are. But you know, I worked with like penal code schizophrenics and you know, some severe, you know, psychosis and stuff like that. And I think that, you know, some of the experiences I had kind of helped me along as a counselor and let me come up alongside those people and just be a help, you know. But I'll tell you, there was, you know, weird experiences that I even had. I worked in Berkeley with 5150s, and I saw a lot of the darkness that comes off of those streets, you know.
Yeah.
And just people that are, you know, sometimes they just get a little bit afflicted, and it's sad, interesting, but it's sad, and it's also very eye-opening to, you know, personal experiences and stuff like that too, listening to some of them. But anyways, to kind of get back to what I was talking about, when we were kids, we went to a place called Bodega Dunes. And this was a really, I think, kind of positive experience that kind of happened. And me and my brother, who, you know, he decided one day that we were going to climb this like rock face. And it had like a concrete slab that I didn't really see until we got about, I don't know, 50 feet up. I couldn't even tell you what the grade of this hill is, but he put me in front and kept pushing me up from behind, just saying, keep going, keep going. And, you know, we got about middle of this like climb, and I looked down and I saw like a cement, I don't remember if it was cement or granite or rock, but it was basically going in the water. I was crapping my pants, and I told my brother, we're not going to be able to do this, you know, and he just said, keep going, don't stop. We can't stop now. Well, this is where just another, you know, takes a weird turn. I was on top of the hill. I don't know how I got on top of the hill. My brother was sitting next to me, and he was white as a sheet, and he was huffing and hyperventilating and almost like having an anxiety attack. And I'm like, how did we get up here? And my brother said, I was going to fall. I started falling, and you picked me up and put me on top of the hill. And I was like, look, man, you know, and in retrospect now, I'm like, physics, I'm 6, you're probably 14.
Right.
Maybe I'm 5 at that time. How the heck does this happen? And it was just, you know, what's weird is, you know, some of the geographics that I grew up in kind of play a role in just things that I kind of learned later from other, you know, listening to other people talk and just different experiences. Like I had experiences in like Cave Junction, Oregon, on the Smith River, up on the fire trails up there in the mountains, where There's a lot of Sasquatch encounters up by Klamath Falls. I was there at this Bodega Dunes. I've been out by Yosemite, and things like that. And it's just kind of weird geographically how some of this stuff has happened as I've looked back on it, where it occurred. I had the normal, entities and ghost type situations. We left the Napa Valley when I was a teenager, and we moved up to Nevada City, Grass Valley area, up in the foothills by like Lake Tahoe, Donner, Summit. People might understand where that's at. Up in the high Sierras.
Mm-hmm.
And my dog that I had growing up was getting older, but she still slept with me. Her name was Sarah, and we lived upstairs in this house, and it was an old house that we rented. We hadn't bought a house up there yet, and my dog used to wake up in the middle of the night to something standing over my bed. Just a big, tall, dark figure, just a shadow, and she would growl at it, and I'd wake up. And at this time, I'm a little bit older. I'm like 13, 14, and I literally just told it to get out of my room. And I just a kid that thought he was, I was fearless or whatever. And I didn't feel like it was a bad energy or anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something that kind of manifested. And, but downstairs one night, my mom used to like to play bingo. My dad worked away. He would only come home on the weekends. So I was like a latchkey kid at night, kind of having fun, having friends over, doing whatever. And it's right around the time that I learned how to dreamscape. But before that happened, I was in the kitchen and I was playing with the radio, and it sat on a wall that went into a hallway back into the back bedroom. And I was just about to call one of my best friends growing up to come over and let him know I was there by myself so we could party, meaning like, have coffee, be crazy, be teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some Irish coffee, still a little bit of Dad's Jack Daniels or something. And I'm sitting there and I'm playing with the radio, and this face comes around the wall and looks at me right directly in the face. And once again, it's a distorted, weird looking, evil, I say evil, but the honest truth is it's just, it's so abnormal. It was like something that you don't see every day, and it's just looking at me. So I get freaked out. I run around the hallway because I think I'm going to be really cool, and I watch my mom and dad's door close, like it went in there and closed the door. And I'm like, how the heck did that just happen? And just, the weird energy that goes on. It's like you'd hear your stuff going up and down the stairs, the typical things walking around upstairs. That kind of stuff just always kind of happened. And one of the things that I kind of left out, to kind of go back, I had contact with something really, really, I'd say dark. And it was almost an abduction scenario when I was on that same street that happened when I was a child. And in retrospect, like these kind of things kind of pop up, and it looks a certain way, but it's almost like that thing was robotic in nature. It was almost like that person who I saw the face in the newspaper, because unfortunately, something did happen to someone, and it's just the manifestations that keep happening. That's kind of how my life's went. It's like things just keep happening, and I'm always like, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. You tell it away. So to go back to the house, I go to school and I meet Mr. Stanley, and Mr. Stanley's a psychology teacher, and he's just one of the coolest guys. And I was young and impressionable, and he was one of the first teachers that really I got interested in, and I got really interested in psychology. And we were reading our textbook, and there was a thing that came up called dreamscaping. And it was just like this little snippet, like a little paragraph in the book. And it just really caught my attention, and I just focused on it. So after class, we're normal 14-year-old kids or whatever. They're not going to go and, talk to their teacher after class. I stayed after, and I said, hey, this is really interesting. Can you explain this to me? What does this mean? And he's like, well, basically, you can learn how to control your dreams. And I'm like, sign me up. I want to do that. And he said, well, I do have a tape on it. And he had like one of those old cassette tapes. He said, but you got to make sure you bring it back to me because it's my only copy. And I was like, all right, Mr. Stanley, no problem. So I go home, I pop that tape in the tape deck, and it basically tells me that if I go throughout my day and keep asking myself if I'm dreaming, eventually it's going to repetitiously get into my subconscious. And it said when before you go to bed, count and ask yourself if you're dreaming. Like, 1, am I dreaming? 2, am I dreaming? Things like that. So immediately I did it. The next day I asked myself all day, and I'd answer the question, no, I'm not dreaming. I went to sleep that night, did the count back, got into what was in like a dark room state, where I guess I had fallen asleep, and I asked myself if I was dreaming, and I could hear it in the room, and I said, yeah, I think I am. So I know this sounds like cliche, but what any person wants to do in a dream is fly. So I start flying. The problem is I'm flying around a room that's like has 4 walls and no ceiling. Okay, so I'm thinking I'm having a good time, but let me tell you, I was playing with a place and a thing that I didn't understand, because something started flying around that room with me, and it wasn't fun, and it was like feathery and wingy, and made like, it was like, when moths get real close to your ear and you get freaked out. But it was the feeling was so intense, and I got scared and almost broke out of that stage and went into another stage, which was my dog, who, was my little buddy growing up. And she turned on me. And next thing you know, I'm not going to get too graphic, but I'm sitting there with a kitchen knife, and I'm putting it in my dog's throat, and my mom's watching, laughing. Wow. And I woke up and I went, I can't do this. This isn't working, So the next day, I can't wait to go see Mr. Stanley. I tell him what happens, and he said, it can go either way, but you just have to keep doing it and know it's just a dream. So it's something I kind of started playing with when I was a teenager. And, it was kind of something to, I think, go try to battle some of these things that I was going in, you get a little bit more machismo, and you start to go through puberty, and things start changing, and also with some of the things that had happened in my life, I just had something to prove and something to show, and I wanted to know what was going on, and I, I grew up in a very hyper religious family, very, you got to go to church every Sunday, and some of that stuff has still stayed with me, but I went and branched out into my own spiritual walk, and I've had a lot of different touches, like with Buddhism, with just different things, and I'm open to a lot more than just what people tell you need to be into. And I just know that there's so much more out there with some of these experiences that I've had. And so I think at that point, since I was such an introverted kind of person with some of the things that I was holding on to in that energy, I was just, at that point where you're trying to find an answer. You're trying to find a reason for things that are happening. There's a lot of stuff that were just snippets. I told my family about this ghost that we had in the house. They said I was, basically full of it, until each one of them had their experiences. My mom got the arm around her in bed. My brother saw it, walking upstairs into my room. My dad heard it down the stairs and saw it out where the wood buck was, where he was chopping wood. And they're like, oh yeah, it's real. This is kind of different. And then of course it opens up, your dad telling you that something, came out of his closet when he was young and flew through him when he was playing. And, he's one of those old school guys that, didn't really fib too much back then.
Right. Yeah.
But, and you just kind of like, you're looking for answers, and the experiences just kind of kept on going. As I got older, so, I talked about those couple of properties. We had eventually moved out of the foothills and moved back down to the Napa Valley area where I finished high school. And I had an experience where I was in a house about 2 miles from the country house, and it was really, really bizarre, because I don't know if anybody's ever woken up twice, but I woke up twice, and it was the most bizarre thing that ever happened. I was like sleeping in my bed, and I fell asleep, and I woke up, and there was a blue light in my room, and there were like shadows walking like on the ceiling. You know, you're basically like, what's going on in my room? Normally when I wake up in my room, there might be an alarm clock, a radio playing, you know, back then maybe some incense, but not like movement and lights and things like that. Well, then I woke up again, and as I woke up, the light flickered and went away, and I was really up. And I was like, what is that about, you know? And I sat there and I started having these weird memories, and it's that typical, like I was fighting some being and kicking it and trying to get back to where I was. And it was the typical things that you see like on TV and sketched out. And you're just like, what is going on? But see, back then, you know, being 43 and like this happening when I was like 18, you shouldn't be seeing things that look like gray aliens, you know? I mean, and I wasn't reading, you know, Von Daniken, or, you know, I wasn't into McKenna or any of that stuff back then. I didn't have any of that knowledge. I mean, the most I knew was Mr. Stanley's class in high school, and, you know, my own experiences and kind of being hush hush and keeping everything a secret, you know? So those beings, like, they really like tripped me out because I felt like I was fighting like three of them off. And, you know, in retrospect, I'm like, did I wake up too soon? You know, and I don't necessarily believe that, you know, I was kind of being physically abducted. I just think that it's another one of these scenarios. You know, it's another one of these weird things that you kind of, it's like poltergeist stuff, you know. As I got older, things got a little bit more powerful, you know, like I lived in a house, you know, in the latter years, just a few years ago, where we lived on a railroad tracks, and literally a train came right through our room. So I look outside to see the train, and there's nothing there. You know, and my wife heard it too, like that I'm with now. I mean, this is something that was recent, and we'd hear you know, popping that would go from one side of the wall to another and just pop. It was like, okay, what was that? You know. And what's funny is, you know, like I can go in and fill in some of the middle parts, but I have two kids with my wife and two little girls. And when my wife was pregnant with my daughter, we used to go hiking and walking all the time. And I live right by the Great Lakes, kind of on the Indiana-Michigan border. Okay. And now that's where I'm at. And there were times, you know, where we were walking and everything on the water. We were walking like next to these sloughs, and things got placid in waterways. And we were seeing like reflections of the houses like back, and just got euphoric. And then all of a sudden we're in next to this pond, and me and her both lost time. And she happened to be pregnant at the time. And, you know, now like I have a daughter who just turned 4 years old, that is really into planets and astronomy, and just has really weird psychic like things. She can like just say things, and, you know, it's just weird. Like the experiences is just, they don't stop, you know. And now it's kind of manifesting in my kids as well, and that's really bizarre, you know. When I was younger, I, you know, really got into you know, hanging out with some hippies and stuff when I was in college, and kind of like getting away from the whole Christian, I got to go to youth group and all that stuff. I got rebellious, and I started hanging out with some really, really cool people that made their own clothes. And, you know, it was like the Bohemian area of California back then. I mean, all the way up to Bohemian Grove, believe it or not, which is a little snippet. But one night I was really young. I had an ex-wife, and we didn't get along very good. And I wanted to go hang out with my hippie friends, and she wanted to stay home. So I went out and hung out with my hippie friends, and I had a great night. The only difference is I was gone for most of the night. Now, unfortunately, you know, my ex-wife, she wasn't the most faithful of kinds. And, you know, that night, not only did I was going to the JC, I was going to college, and, you know, it was like one of those times where you're kind of on your own and independence happened. And, you know, a lot of my friends were doing things, you know, back then they did the psychedelics and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of shied away from doing all that stuff, and kind of left the house where they were, you know, they were dropping acid and smoking weed and all that. And I just wasn't into that night. Well, like at 12 o'clock at night, I'm next to these canals in Santa Rosa, California, and I see this guy, and he's like walking these two big Rottweilers. And these Rottweilers were not normal sized Rottweilers. They were, they just look really huge. Mm-hmm. And I was like, did I get like a little contact in there? Did somebody maybe drop me something? I didn't know. Well, next thing you know, I'm in the canal and it's like flooding time. It's like back, in the Russian River area in Santa Rosa, it floods. And when it's like raining in that season, those sloughs are going fast. Somehow I got caught up in a slough because I remember back then you had pagers, and my pager stopped working. I'm in the slough and I'm like trying to fight to get out of this water. But the last thing I remember was these dang Rottweilers.
Yeah.
And this guy walking them. So then I get out. I'm swallowing water. The canal was probably, it's probably a 12-foot wide canal. It was probably about 6 or 8 feet of rushing water going into another, drop off or slough. I got out of that. I was soaking wet. So I start walking on the path, and then I'm starting to get chased by these shadow figures. So, I'm going like, what is going on? And I go and I try to seek refuge. And I literally go like knock on this door. And I remember somebody coming to the window and looking at me. And I turn around and I start seeing events in my life flash by. And I'm like, what is going on? So like, I'm just out on my own in the middle of a town. And then I'm looking through my apartment window where my ex-wife was. And I literally was watching her with somebody else. We'll just leave it at that. From about 10 miles away, where I think I am geographically. All right. And I'm pretty much losing my mind. So back then, I didn't know about psychotic breaks, but I was about at that age. So I was like, am I going nuts? Mm-hmm. So I go and I'm lost, and I end up back at the house where I started. And they're like, oh my gosh, Randy, where were you? We were so worried about you. We tried to page you, whatever. And my pager starts going off. And I'm not soaking wet anymore. And I'm like, what is going on? And they're like, it was just one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had, and it was like another one of those situations where I'm like losing time, and it was just bizarre.
Yeah, it seems to be a common thing with you with the lost time, even with people around you.
Yeah, and what's weird is come to find out about a year later, what I saw going on through the window really happened. And that's just bizarre. Like you usually you lose time or whatever, but you don't come up with like these. I don't know. You can't be two places at once. I got married for the first time really, really early. And, I had, my grandfather passed away. He was a 40-year Navy man. And, I had some stuff that I had to go pick up. I was living in Santa Rosa and I had to pick up some stuff from his house in Napa. He still lived at his old house on Roosevelt Street, him and my grandmother, and they had passed away. And my uncle and aunt were kind of in charge of the estate. And I wanted all of his books. And what's funny is my grandpa was the first person I ever listened to like talk radio back in the day. He used to sit at his desk and listen to talk radio. But anyways, I went over there to pick up some stuff. And I had a Ford Explorer Sport this time. And the year probably would have been, I don't know, must have been around 2000, maybe. I filled up, I got my stuff from my aunt and uncle, got some things of my grandfather's, and I'm driving from Napa back to Santa Rosa where I lived. Well, my wheel and my car turned, okay, and I didn't turn it. And my truck almost flipped over. I was in the back of Sonoma, in the back country, in between, and literally had to pull my wheel straight again, and then I start hearing rustling in my car, and I start hearing something going through like my grandfather's stuff, like something like, and I'm started to have like this fight with this like thing in the car, yelling at it, telling it it's not going to win. Just a bizarre power struggle for like 45 minutes until I get home. And this is where it gets.
So you kept driving?
Yeah, I kept driving, yelling at it. I think I might have pulled over once and kind of got out of the truck and then got back in. because I really got scared when the wheel turned.
Yeah.
This is like, it's been about 19 years. So, I just remember being close to this Clover store at a dairy, and I remember pulling over and yelling at it, and I got back in the truck, and then when I got home and pulled up outside, I had to bring this stuff in, and I had like a front office, so I brought the stuff in. I didn't really have a weird feeling or anything. I just went, that was bizarre. That kind of stuff just happened. It almost, I think at that time in my life, I'd almost accepted it.
Right.
But the weird thing is, I went in and so my ex-wife is in bed. I didn't get home until probably like 10 or 11 that night. And she was already in bed. And I went in the room because I wanted to tell her what happened. And this is all I remember. I woke up and I'm in this place where things are flickering, lights flickering. I feel like I have eyes all over me. And this weird entity, like dark, had like its hair in a crown, looked at me and said, "You've saved a brother today." And I went, "What?" And I'm sitting there in this like euphoric state, okay? And I wake up and my ex-wife is calling 911 because she said I had a heart attack and died on the bed.
Huh.
So I get up and I go, "No, I'm fine. I'm okay." She's like, "You don't understand. You came in, you started talking about this thing that was in your truck, and you literally fell on the bed and you were done, you were gone."
Wow.
And and I'm telling you, it's like for this story, it's like I wanted to tell it, but I can't really remember all this. It's really just bits and pieces and kind of loose, and those are just the things I remember of it. But she was freaked out, like she literally thought of. And she was like, "This is just too much, like what is, like what the heck just happened?" And I didn't learn about people going missing or like things happening and people kind of going into like, I don't know if they want to call it different dimensions or, out of body experiences, but the weird thing is there's been so much different type of stuff that's happened. Like, I don't know why it just couldn't just be ghosts. Why do I have to see weird stuff? And, and I don't want to go into the darker things because I think there's a yin and yang. And I think there's a positive force too that comes in because there's always been, some kind of cool euphoric things. I was up in the mountains one time and I was kind of living in a tent with a dog, and there was kind of a field of sorts in California, if you know what I mean. There's gardening going on. Mm-hmm. And I kind of just, hung out for a couple months and kind of watched over some friends, gardening stuff. And I literally walked down with the dog one day and I saw, something hovering over the field. And it literally shot across the top of my head. And it was almost like it was saying later on, like saying hello. It was just bizarre. And I was the only one there, and there's been those kind of experiences where, I was the only one there. And it was like a great feeling. It wasn't so bad or so dark, and then there's just weird experiences. Like if we go back to my sister's house that I told you was below that property, I'd stayed there, because I moved around and went to school and stuff like that, and I'd come visit, and I had nephews. So I went over and, stayed like probably 4 or 5 days at my sister's house when I was in my early 20s. And I fell asleep. She let me have, my nephew's rooms, and they got to go sleep in the big room. And I was asleep next to a window, and I remember kind of waking up to a blue light. Didn't really think much of it. Felt like I had a normal night's sleep. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't wearing a t-shirt, and it was kind of a hot, California day. So I probably had like a sheet kind of up around like my chest area when I was sleeping. But when the next day when I woke up and went to go out there to have breakfast, I kind of walked out in my shorts, and my sister's like, "What the heck, dude? Did you like stay half in the sun?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I could feel kind of a warm, burning feeling. Well, the part of my body that was like over the sheet, not under the sheet, was completely red, like I'd been sunburned. Huh. Like like that, because I wasn't out in the sun, like getting a sunburn. I always wear a shirt out in Cal, like I was pretty self-conscious unless I was around my family, being a chubby kid and all that,
Mm.
But I remember, like, it looked like literally like where the sheet was where I was sleeping, like I got sunburned while I was in bed. Like my whole bottom half of my torso was completely white, or normal skin color. And it peeled and it hurt and it felt like a burn. And I didn't have it before I went to bed, So it's just another one of those weird things that kind of have happened,
And how does your family take all this stuff?
I think my brother's a retired sheriff. And the funny things around like Thanksgiving dinner and stuff is what Randy says true, like the wife will like ask. He's like, oh yeah, hang out with them long enough, you'll see. He's like, yeah, we've had some weird experiences. Yep, those things have happened. My mom just has kind of said that, it's like I've always been a little weird ever since I was a kid. Like weird things have always kind of happened around me. And there's just been a lot of weird situations. And I have a couple family members that, kind of experience things too. And I've kind of seen it in my kids as well. And, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I'll tell you this, I had girlfriends before that left me because of it. They were like, I'm done. When I moved out here to Indiana from California, we went all the way in the southern states to New Orleans. And in New Orleans, I was starting to have some really weird dreams too. And this was just about 5 years ago. And my girlfriend at the time that we drove out here, we drove her 3 kids out here. She watched a moon follow us all the way from New Orleans up here to Indiana, and she couldn't explain it.
Now, when you say a moon following you, you mean just a light in the sky, or saying that looked like the moon?
It was a circular light that just kind of hung out with us for a few states.
Huh.
I'd never seen anything like that.
I've heard a story similar to that once before, and I don't remember where.
It was bizarre. Like, we stopped at a rest stop, and we tried to drive from New Orleans all the way up to Goshen, Indiana, and like we just basically shared the road and tried to do it in a day. So we literally drove all overnight, and we stopped at a rest stop, and I saw a light through the clouds kind of breaking through, and I felt something weird, and I told her name was Misha. I said, hey, look over there. Do you see that? She's like, yep. Well, we got about 45 minutes down the road, and I looked out the window because she was driving, and I saw it still. And it literally followed us through, like, Kentucky, Alabama. I mean, I don't know where all the states we went through, Tennessee. I mean, it had to have been at least 3 states until, daybreak in the morning. And it was just bizarre. And she was like, that's just weird, And I said, I don't know. It's just one of those strange occurrences that's happened, And yeah, I was in Yosemite probably around 2010. I was up in Angels Camp, and we did me and my friends, we did like a zombie western movie called The Dead and the Damned. They've made a couple prequels to it. It's totally ridiculous. B like zombie movie, and I did some work with what's her name, Jill Gibson from the Mamas and the Papas, and her son Mattia Baroni was a friend of mine, and we were doing just kind of weird stuff. And you always hear about weird stuff with granite and rocks now. And what's funny is we did a lot of those shoots like over these rocks and in this granite. And I had went up to Angels Camp and up there a few times when I was younger, but more for like church camps and stuff like that. I had never really been up to see Yosemite, even though I lived in California. But we were literally like just a few minutes from the park. And one of the things I did was I'd go pick up some of the actors that were coming from the airport in San Francisco, or people that lived in Marin County, and I'd kind of drive them up there, when I didn't have things to do that day. And I stopped at a hotel, and it got to be like 2 a.m, and I was just like, I was tired. I couldn't drive through. I needed to go to sleep. So I stopped, and I remember I got like steak and eggs at a Denny's, and I stopped at this little crappy motel, the one that's like one level, and it's kind of like a horseshoe, and it's creepy, and there's probably a lot of weird stuff going on there.
Right.
And it's cheap. So I go up there. I said, "Hey, you got any vacancies?" Yep. I get in the room, normal, crappy little room. I'm there to sleep. I lay down. I go to sleep. So in my dream, there's this thing outside this hotel, and he's pointing to the sign, and he's basically showing me that he's there. He's outside. And as this dream progresses, he's one of those weird type entities. He comes into the dream and starts doing some things to me that are a little inappropriate, let's say. And it really, like, I felt really violated. I felt kind of like it was just not a good feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I literally had woke up and I was punching in the air, thinking that thing was still in there. And it was just one of those weird experiences where you just, in retrospect, you're like, what was that? And I had another similar experience to that at my sister's house, that same 4 days where I'd gotten that weird sunburn, where I woke up punching things in the air that weren't there because I literally felt like something was sticking its tongue in my ear while I was sleeping. And I woke up just freaked out, And another thing too is I was talking to my wife, earlier today, and she said, "Well, make sure you talk about, that diamond shaped grid pattern that was on your back." And I was like, "What?" She's like, "Yeah, remember when I asked you if you fell down a stairwell?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "You had?" She's like, "I think I even still have the picture." I guess I literally had triangles, diamonds, in a almost a tread pattern across my back a couple of years ago. I had woken up and and she had saw it and said, "What happened to you?" And I was like, "I don't know, nothing." What are you talking about? She's like, "You look like you got ran over by a truck." It's just those kind of things, just bizarre.
Yeah. It's almost like you have a whole nother life you're living that you don't have any memory of here.
Yeah, and it's like, it's funny. I started, writing, just writing some stuff down, and just some of the funny things is you ever heard of Ed Grimsley?
Not that I'm aware of.
He's passed away now, but he did the UFO Wars things. He used to go, when I first started listening to talk radio back in 2010. George Norrie had this guest named Ed Grimsley, and he was talking about how he used night vision goggles to see UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
So I went on the website, and he had a cell phone number on the website, and it just so happened Ed Grimsley was up in the Napa Valley, and I happened to be, that's where I'm from.
Right.
Excuse me. So I call him up, and this guy answers the phone. He says, "Hello," and I was like, "Is this Ed Grimsley for real from the talk show?" "Yeah." I was like, "You do you do night vision, nighttime UFO, and he, oh yeah, you just pay me $50, bring a couple people, and I literally went up there and met this guy at a Mexican restaurant. He was a little guy with big fingernails, and he kind of I don't know, looked like he kind of spent some time doing some trimming. He had some trimmings on his flannel shirt, and he took me out for a night watch, and he said, "Just go buy some AA batteries and meet me at this, baseball field, and I'll be there with these Generation 3 night vision goggles." So we met him and went out there and didn't think anything was going to happen, and he gave us these legit $3,700 Generation 3 night vision goggles to kind of watch the night sky. And as the sky set at you put these goggles on, honestly, takes you through the sky, and it's amazing, man. Just things start flying around. You can't explain them. They're like heat signatures, and they show up. And he was just kept going. You see this? Oh my gosh! You see that over there? They're everywhere. And I'm just sitting there going, just taking it in, and it's just one of those moments where it's like, wow, this is real. And to be able to have that experience and it be in my backyard, and you were literally talking around the same area that I saw some of the stuff. And a couple of the people that I was with, they've had some of those kind of similar experiences, and it's just almost like it felt. See, he thought he was seeing UFOs. We just felt like we were projecting. It was just a weird energy and a weird experience. It's just. We were seeing things that were see-through. We were seeing things trickle down in the atmosphere. We saw things that looked like delta-shaped things Okay, so back then, just kind of got into the whole UFO things and started like doing a lot of research and kind of trickling into some of the stuff that get some explanations. He kind of followed me down a rabbit hole, and um, I'd go out to Bodega Bay and kind of pay attention to things that were flying in the sky that looked kind of different. And I live really close to Bohemian Grove, up in Cazadero,
Right.
and a lot of stuff goes on up there. And just some of what's funny is the geographics. I talked a little bit earlier about being in Oregon at Gasquet Highway 199, Jedediah Smith State Park. I was up at like a boys camp, and I was supposed to spend a few weeks up there. And, I was learning how to become a man or whatever. I was about 15 years old, and I had a buddy that I was up there with, and we kind of stayed in some barracks. And, when you're a teenager, you want to like venture off and, be crazy and kind of do fun things. Well, we got an inkling to go take a hike up the fire trail in the middle of the night in Oregon, and like right there on the Smith River. And so we jet out and we sneak out from the night staff, go up this hill, and literally probably, I don't know, went up like 3 or 4 miles up this like fire trail. We're on the top of these hills, and we realized we're tired, we're kids, so we were just gonna like take a nap and go back to the camp in the morning. So me and my friend Ruben were kind of huddling, together. It's kind of cold night. I had like a poncho, it's like a Mexican poncho on to kind of keep warm, like a blanket. And I'm just sitting there shivering, and all of a sudden, it's like I hear and kind of feel something kind of sniffing me. And my friend Ruben, I remember him going, "What is that? What is that?" And I was like, "Don't move," like the whole like, "Don't move."
Mm-hmm.
And so this thing's like sniffing us, and I'm thinking maybe it's a bear, maybe it's a wild boar, and I'm thinking we might be into a little bit of trouble, and didn't really think this little excursion we went on.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if we got lucky, but this thing stood up, and literally, like, you couldn't see the stars anymore in the backdrop, but you couldn't really see it, and it just kind of walked away.
Huh.
And I don't know. I mean, I can't say what it was. Bears usually don't. It just didn't. The smells, kind of sitting there and not even knowing that we fell asleep. Don't even remember going to sleep. It's just one of those situations. Once again, kind of in a weird spot, weird thing happening. And I mean, back then I just thought maybe it was a bear or whatever. You wouldn't expect a bear to up and then walk away and then kind of get lost in the distance. It's just another one of those things. Me and on this path, and what's funny is that there's a little fairy door on a tree that you can kind of open up, and it looks like a little kid put it there, and literally you could put like little notes and stuff in there, and there's like little trinkets, and it's in this little park that's around where our house is. And one day we were walking there. This is right around the time I hearing things and having some things happen in the woods, and I remember explain it in her. It was just another one of those situations that happened together. It was like butterflies were flying all around. They were really like being really intrusive, but really gentle and kind of like falling on us and like, like brushing up against our faces. And like, it was like this weird path where we walked through, and like the birds were singing and everything was beautiful. I mean, it's like, maybe if you were smoking some pot kind of a situation, but yet we weren't. She was pregnant. We were completely sober. We were just taking a hike. And it was just, I can't explain it. It's like the most beautiful, like, force kind of took over. And it was just weird because it had a door. And I always laugh when I hear like Joshua talking on your show, because he talks a lot about the fairy lore. And it was like one of those times where it was almost like we were getting like kissed and beckoned and kind of wanted us to stay in the area.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were a long time again, and it was another one of those experiences that we had shared together. It just didn't seem right, like time and place kind of. And I had taken a picture. I had gone out hiking in those same woods before, and I got a picture of a face next to a tree that kind of looks like what they would call a Sasquatch. Recordings of some weird animals, almost sound like monkeys talking to me in the middle of this like forest in Indiana, which is just just kind of some of the things along the way.
Huh.
But and it's like I don't want to get into a lot of some of the more like gruesome things that have happened, because there's been some really weird things that have happened with Just some really bad, kind of negative energy, kind of showing me things that they shouldn't show me and things like that too. But just stuff that, just the normal kind of ebb and flows with the good and the bad.
Talk a little bit about the how the dreamscaping is different from, say, a lucid dream.
Well, see, for me, I haven't done much as far as like trying to listen or learn about lucid dreaming or listening to binary beats and things like that to kind of get yourself into that state. Dreamscaping is more like, it's almost like opening up a remote viewing. I can't, like, if you really get into it, it's like it can become a hobby, and like you can learn to fly like Peter Pan. You can basically take over your dreams. I would go and unfortunately would find myself kind of with monsters and really weird beings. I have a lot of dreams that are centered around alien invasions, and I think it's just because it's my mind and kind of where I like to go and the kind of the stuff that I'm into. But it is something that it's so easy to learn. And for me, at least, and for a few other people that I've taught and that have actually, given me some insight that have kind of mentored me, it's really simple. It's just something you've got to kind of keep focused on. Lucid dreaming is not something that I'm completely, it's just, I don't know if that's something that works for me, because it's just always been, I kind of know that I'm in my dreams. But the lucid dreaming part of it isn't something I'm really, really familiar with, I guess. It's not something I've practiced or I've really tried to get into, because dreamscaping has worked so much for me.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Okay.
What's weird is now that I combined like listening, I listen to a lot of talk radio at night, and that can make my dreamscaping very interesting.
I bet.
Especially when you're like listening to McKenna or somebody like that, and it can get really weird. And sometimes it affects my wife too while she's sleeping next to me. She's like, "You can't talk to me like that in your sleep." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "You say some of the weirdest things," and I'm like, she's like, "Are you trying to brainwash me while I sleep?" And I'm like, "I'm not trying to say nothing to you." I said, "Are you sure you're not hearing?" Because I listen to the talk radio like on my cell phone. I love listening to that stuff when I go to sleep. And she's like, "You got to stop messing with things when you're sleeping."
Yeah, you have enough problems when you're awake.
I kind of have a tendency to go. Yeah, when I like to go like do some hunting. Sometimes I'll go in my dreams and I kind of like say, it's almost like chanting, and we'll say, I want to go to a certain place. I want to find a certain thing. And I don't want to get too specific on what I do, because it probably isn't for everybody. I've read some interesting books along the way. I've studied some interesting things. Some of the things that you are into, I've kind of like looked into, like Seth and Sir Lester Crowley, different like magic type stuff. Like I like to go to certain spots and meditation and Buddhism. I did a lot of Zazen Buddhism when I was younger, and a lot of meditation when I started working in psych, and could kind of project when I was in a meditative state. Like I followed a Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh, who is from northern Vietnam, and he has a place called Plum Village and a place called Spirit Rock in Berkeley. And that guy's books, he has a book called Breathe, You're Alive, and just walking meditations and just things like that have really kind of went with my dreamscaping and blown it way out of proportion. Like when you can control your breathing in your mind, and you can already project, because Buddhists talk about projecting like imagery on like white walls. Right. When I was younger, I can't say that it happened a lot, but there were a couple times where I broke that, like, I fractured something. There was something that, I got past something that your normal, brain and stuff can't get past. And it's a beautiful thing. It really is. The human mind and people in general. And that's why I love listening to other people's stories and stuff too, because as we've gotten, more, as people like you and like Joshua and different people have talked, and like Seth and just different people that I've listened to, you hear and people's experiences are similar. They're starting to get some synchronicity, in with them, and it's awesome. Like even listening to like other people in different cultures, like Red Pill Junkie, and it's just awesome to see the correlation of how like-minded a lot of us are. It's just crazy.
Oh, yeah. So your daughter, you said, is 4, and she has experiences too. Do you think that kind of is like a family thing? That like that weird activity in your brain may have like gone over to her?
Yeah, and my wife thinks it's partially the fact that we've lost time together, and like she's really, really like smart, and she talks about like, okay, she just turned 4. She talks about the states. She already knows the alphabet. She can count to 100. The kid is, she predicts things. She tells us things about outer space. She talks about being on other planets. Trip. She has a very vivid imagination. And we call her our little Nordic because she's like the only one with blonde hair in our family.
Huh.
So it's like, it's kind of a, and it's a joke, but we're starting to see it in Kaya, my younger daughter, who is about to be 3. She's starting to say things too before they happen. And like the other day I was singing, I sing to my kids, we play music and they have like fun time and all that. And in the morning we try to do, get them going, get them positive. So I listen to like different kind of oldies and different kind of music. And I was just singing a song that I know she's never heard. And I said, I've lost my thrill. And she said, On Blueberry Hill. And I'm like, what? Just the little things like that. And you're like, and you're finishing songs I know you've never heard. They listen to like, I don't want to say the Wiggles and different stuff like that, but there's like kids, artists out there like, they're not listening to that kind of stuff. And I mean, Dad listens to like hardcore music and like reggae. So it just, the stuff that they pick up, it's amazing. And, unfortunately, it hurts the heart a little bit, but because some of the negative energies it kind of surrounds. And we're dealing with that. We're dealing with it really well. And the awesome thing is that we've learned to overcome. So we're giving her some tools and not like really, pointing it out too much, just letting it be and seeing how she takes care of it and where her fears and her gifts are, and just, letting her be, and, letting her be a kid,
Yeah.
and trying to kind of, also keep some of it away, but also, if you play with it, forces too much, they kind of tend to take over. And there's a lot of things that just kind of come through with us and our family. And, sometimes they're good experiences, sometimes they're bad. And, we're just there to be a family and to have fun and try to let them just be kids, because I honestly don't feel like I was allowed to be a kid, and my wife grew up in Vermont, and it's funny, a lot of my wife's life, she mirrors mine. She was almost abducted. She had some things go on when she was younger, and it's kind of weird how our experiences together have now created these kids that are growing up a certain way. So it's going to be, it's awesome to watch. But I also know with that gift comes a little bit of hardship and pain too. So we're just,
Do you think maybe the kids are remembering past,
the right thing?
Do you think maybe the kids are remembering past lives when they're like finishing the songs like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, today we were sitting at the table. I am a nut for pizza. So are my kids. Pizza tonight, and Amara was telling me that we went to a restaurant a long, long time ago. It was years ago. She had this pizza with pineapple on it and all this stuff, and I was there and I was having a really good time. It was a really fun place, and I literally have never taken my kids out to pizza. We always have it in home. They talking about, we went and drove out to Vermont in May and stayed by Lake Champlain and stayed at a cabin. And they started talking about all sorts of things like they were from Vermont. So, they've been there once. Their mom's from Vermont. And, my daughter says we're going to end up living in Arizona. My brother does live in Nevada, and we're talking about moving back, closer there. Yeah. And I mean, they talk about things like they're other people,
Yeah.
and it's just, we sit there and we try not to make too big of a deal about it, but, I just think that there's something happening. There's something in the air, because I hear it, when I listen to other people's stories too. And I love, like hearing people that have gone through the same kind of things as me,
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, I would love to know what it is, but I just don't know if we're ever going to really know what it is. We just got to kind of keep, pressing forward. I try to educate myself. I try to read books that I hear, but, a lot of the stuff that I actually get a lot out of is like from the 70s and 80s. Some of the newer stuff I've kind of dropped the ball on, and, it's hard. It's a hard thing because there's so much experience, and, I just hope it settles down, for my family. I don't want my kids to have all that stuff because it's like made life a little bit different and difficult.
Right.
It's not always welcoming, but I mean, they're great kids. They got smiles on their faces and they love being outside and riding bikes, and we're going to go with that,
Nice. Well, we're just about out of time, but I thank you for sharing this with us. You have some really interesting experiences.
Yeah, thank you for listening. I mean, really, I didn't even know how I was going to go, and I didn't even need anything to talk about it. It was great, and it's good to get it out and to kind of get it in the open, because a lot of the stuff I just kind of hold on to. So thank you for the opportunity to kind of let some of it out and put it out there into the universe.
I want to give a shout out now to my Patreons, without whom this show may not exist. So I would like to give a special shout out to those pledging $10 or more: Allison Cook, Eric Hervin, Lindsay Murray Trebet, Nick Martin, UFO Weekly News, Super Inframan, Tim, Damian Tallman, Edu Camahort, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Maria, Nate Syria, Jennifer Campbell, Mike McGuire, American Rambler, Paul Buscini, Kevin, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Matthias Sunby, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, Sean Cosgrove, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cisternos, Ray Benedetto, Lindsey Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris is a hot dog a sandwich, John Eddy, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you all so very much. Your support is invaluable.
Conspiranormal Podcast proudly presents the Strange Realities Conference. Strange Realities. Come join us for one day of presentations on the paranormal with live music at night featuring Tim Banal,
The Rise and Fall of the Flat Earth Theory,
Joshua Cutchin,
Alien Hybrid Lore,
Joe Damari,
Pushing the Limits of Reality,
Guy Malone,
Roswell 1947, What Really Happened,
Timothy Renner,
Pennsylvania Wildman,
and added to the lineup, Mark Anthony Wyatt,
Cornish Legends and UFO Sightings,
Zach Hunt.
presentation of his book Unraptured,
Followed by a live recording of the Conspiranormal Podcast. More speakers and music acts to be announced. October 19, 2019, SIR Nashville.
Tickets and info at www.strangerealitiesconference.com. $40 at the door, $30 pre-sale.
You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.